The Sony 24mm G Master and the FE35 1.8 are two lenses that don't often get talked about in the same sentence because they have a very wide price difference between the two lenses, and you get the f1.4 on the 24mm and the f1.8 on the 35mm. In this video, we're going to talk about the differences between these two lenses, namely for people who shoot talking head YouTube videos kind of like this one, and when I would choose to buy the 24mm f1.4 or when I would choose to buy the 35mm f1.8. So to start off, we're shooting with the 24mm G Master, and we're shooting at f1.4 on it as well, just because why not get the maximum background blur that we can. We're shooting on the A7 IV in full frame mode right now, and in this video we're also going to show the differences in these lenses if you're using APS-C mode. It's also going to change the camera perspective a couple times too, just so you can see the difference between what 24mm and 35mm looks like. So right now I'm about an arm's length away from my A7 IV. We're shooting in full frame mode, and we're also using autofocus for the whole video. So let's go ahead and change over to the 35. Now we're shooting with the 35mm at f1.8. I did have to adjust my framing just a little bit. I changed the tilt, and I also had to raise my ISO up from 100 to 125 to get the same amount of brightness out of it. The biggest difference between shooting at 24mm and 35mm is how the background is going to look. You can see the 35mm has brought our background in just a little bit. Even though the focal length is still super similar, it's still tightened up our background. If you look at my face, you also might notice a little bit less distortion because we're shooting at a tighter focal length as well. But since I didn't adjust how close or far away from the lens I was in these shots, my face probably wasn't warped too much anyways in the 24mm. Another big difference you'll notice between running the 35mm at f1.8 and the 24 at f1.4 is you do get a bit blurrier of a background using the 24mm, but you also show more of your background too. So if you're trying to decide between these two lenses, one of the big questions you need to ask is how wide do you want your background to be? Because if you want more of your background in the shot and you don't have a super big room, you're going to want that wider lens so that you can get more of the background in without backing your camera back. Now I have a couple more feet behind my camera to get to the edge of the room, but even with this 35, it's going to be harder to get more of my desk and more of the wall in the shot, which can be a good thing if that's the look you're going for. Now I've got my camera almost right against the wall with the 35mm just to show that we can get more of the background in, but it's not going to have that same wide look that the 24mm will give you. Now we're using the 24mm and we backed it up just a little bit, so we're basically in the same exact spot as we were just using with the 35 1.8. We're also shooting at f1.4 again to get a little bit blurrier of a background. I really like using this shot if you want to show your arms, you want to use gestures, you want to talk a little bit more with your hands, because this just allows you to get a better medium shot than the 35 does. A lot of times in a smaller room with the 35, you're going to get a medium tight shot, and with the 24 you're going to be able to get more of that medium shot to show more of your arms and to show more of your surroundings as well. Now we're using the 24mm about 12 inches from my face, so it is nice and close. Gives us a really good blurry background, but you're also going to notice a little bit more distortion on my face because we do have it up so close to me. So I think if you're using the 24mm and you want to get that medium tight shot, just be prepared to have a little bit of distortion on the face with this shot. It's not the most flattering angle or shot to get. I've just adjusted the camera positioning slightly, but now that we have this in about the same spot, you can just see how much tighter the background is running at 35mm versus running at 24. Now we back the 35mm up so we can compare it to the shot we were getting with the 24. A little bit less distortion in the face while still being able to get a pretty good medium close-up shot. And now for this shot, I do have my 35mm on in APS-C mode, and I've got it backed away about as far as I can from me in this small room. So it is a little bit harder to use the 35mm in a small room without getting a super tight shot. And now we're running the 24mm again in APS-C mode, about that same distance that we were using the 35 at. So using 24mm in APS-C mode gives you about a 35mm equivalent. It's going to be a really versatile lens if you want to get a medium close-up. You can just put your A7 IV or some other Sony cameras into APS-C mode to get a little bit tighter framing if you don't want that full medium shot. Now we're about 2 feet away from the 24mm in APS-C mode, so we can just see how that looks a little bit different as well, especially when you compare to running the 24mm all the way wide open when you're using it in full frame mode. And if you use it really close, it definitely distorts the face more than if you use it in APS-C mode and you back the camera up a little bit. So let's start by getting this out of the way. The 24mm f1.4 retails for about $1,400 and the 35mm retails for $750. So the 24mm is almost double the price of the 35 f1.8. One other thing to note is that the 35 only goes down to f1.8 and the 24 f1.4 is 1.4. So you get about 2/3 of a stop of light brighter, which allows you to shoot at a lower ISO in low light situations using the 24mm lens. Also, the 35 is not even a G series lens and the 24 is a G master lens. So the 24 is just one of Sony's most optically fantastic lenses and just meets all of their criteria for the highest quality lenses that they offer. So this is going to be a top of the line Sony lens versus the 35 f1.8 just being a mid-tier lens. The 24 also has an aperture ring, a manual focus autofocus switch, and it has a programmable side button. The 35mm just has the manual focus autofocus switch and it has a side push button. So you don't get the aperture ring on the lens, but I really don't use it much anyway, so this doesn't really matter to me too much. Now, I know Sony also makes the 35mm f1.4 G Master. That lens goes for $1,400 as well, but that lens suffers from some focus breathing issues that this 35 f1.8 doesn't have. So a lot of people actually prefer to use the 35 f1.8 for video versus using the 35 f1.4, just because it has a little bit quieter autofocus and less focus breathing too. Another reason I compared these lenses is because it's a lot easier to find a good deal on the 24 f1.4 used than it is on the 35 f1.4 used. I wasn't able to find any 35s without spending about $1,000 to $1,100, and I got this 24mm lens used for $775 because it's been out for a little bit longer now. By comparison, I think I paid about $450 or $500 to get the 35 1.8 used. So it's pretty close in price on the used market when you're comparing the 35 1.8 and the 24 1.4. Another important thing to consider when comparing these lenses is the magnification. This just means how big you're able to make a subject appear and how close you're actually able to focus. The 35 gives you about a 63-degree field of view and a 0.24x times magnification, while the 24mm lens gives you about an 83-degree field of view and it only gives you 0.17 times magnification. So you're able to get a little bit closer up in your shots when you're using the 35mm and get that higher magnification range. Another interesting lens we could compare this to is the 20mm f1.8. But I found that if I wanted to go for the tighter shot like I was getting with the 35 and the 24mm in APS-C mode, I just wasn't able to get a very good perspective of my face without introducing too much distortion. So I just really didn't like how the 20mm made my face look. I also made a video comparing the 20mm directly to the 35mm lens. Unfortunately, I already sold the 20mm, but in that video someone commented and said neither of these are portrait lenses. And I get that, and the same thing rings true for this video. The 35mm and the 24mm are not portrait lenses. They're not going to give you the most flattering perspective of your face, but you got to use the focal length and the background blur that allows you to get the shot that you need when you're shooting videos inside, especially if you're in a smaller room and you can't set your camera up quite as far away. Also, if you're filming yourself, it's really nice to have your camera up a little bit closer so you can adjust settings, make sure you're still recording, and things like that too. To tie it all up, if we're comparing the 24mm f1.4 G Master to the 35mm f1.8, I think there's a couple things to consider when you're trying to decide which of these two lenses you should buy. I would buy the 24mm lens if you want the better quality, more versatile lens because it works really well both in full frame and APS-C mode. If you're using it in APS-C mode, you can almost get the exact same look as the 35mm f1.8 lens. And then if you need to go wider, you can always go back to full frame mode too. Also, buy the 24mm lens if you want the higher quality Sony lens just because the colors are a little bit better on it and it's just better glass offered by Sony. The bigger con of the 24mm is if you're up closer to it, you will notice more distortion on the face, but the way that I've found is best to use it is just to back up a little bit further away from the lens, to put it back a little bit further and to get your whole background in the shot and give yourself about 2 feet of distance between the lens and your face. I would also buy the 24mm if you want more of a medium shot and your background to appear larger and to show more of what you've got going on in the background of your videos. It'll give you that blurrier background, but it'll also give you a wider perspective of it. On the other hand, I would buy the 35mm F1.8 if you need to save a little bit of money and if you don't mind getting more of a medium tight shot than you would get with the 24mm lens. It still has really good autofocus, really good image quality, and it looks great. It's just going to give you a little bit less versatility if you're in a smaller room. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any other questions about the 24mm f1.4 G Master or the 35mm f1.8, leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer them. Also, if you're interested in picking up either of these lenses, I have links for both of them, as well as all the gear I use to make videos in the description below. So be sure to check that out. Like this video, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any upcoming content.